welcome to this fourth episode of EVA Media's World of Business Aviation podcast. We'd love to think you're back with us again. Could be your first time. Either way, thank you, and please let us know what you think of the show. I'm Paul Eden, editor of EVA Magazine, and joining me today I have Edwin Brenninkmeyer, who is founder and CEO of Oriens Aviation, based at London Biggin Hill Airport. Edwin, thank you so much for joining us. First off, can you tell us something about Oriens Aviation?
I'd love to. No, thank you, Paul, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So, Oriens Aviation, I've always been very passionate about aviation. I wouldn't say it's in my blood because my parents weren't in aviation, but I've ever since I was 2 or 3, my mother tells me I've always wanted to fly. So we live in a 3-dimensional world, but we only move in 2 dimensions. So for me, it was as obvious as that. I had to fly. Worked for a long time in the family business, moved to venture capital, which is part of our family business, to explore business aviation. So it was a kind of a transition from retail to business aviation. Then started to work with, so then we found as a venture capital business that a lot of the deal flow is in the US, and we really wanted to learn from the US and then transfer that learning to a European company. There wasn't really enough deal flow in Europe, so I started advising companies in Europe, mainly as a vehicle to spot opportunities for the next big thing for me.
Yep.
That's how I came across the Pilatus opportunity, and I set up Oriens Aviation as a result of that. So started off as a Pilatus dealer. We've since expanded. So starting off with just sales, we're now maintenance. I acquired a maintenance business back in 2018. I acquired the maintenance business.
All right.
We're now TechNam dealers as well. We're a Cirrus service center, so we're all things Pilatus. We have an AOC. We're all things TechNam, and we're just Cirrus service. So that's where we are now.
Wow. Okay. Cool. All right. So, 3-year-old Edwin thinks I want to fly. Goes into the family business for a bit, which is retail and everything else you've been describing there. And then, what is the point where suddenly you are flying? When did you first get your hands on an aeroplane and think, absolutely, this is what I want to do?
I think it was, we used to go on holiday in southern Switzerland, and we're actually very, very close to a little airfield, and there are lots of airplanes flying around, and I just felt myself magnetically drawn to these airplanes. So
yeah.
I just went to the airfield, watched the airplanes. My parents eventually took pity on me, and I just persuaded them that I just wanted to experience flying. I already had model aircraft, so I already knew a little bit about aerodynamics. First time I arrived for my first pleasure flight, the weather was bad, and that was actually a good thing because I could show the pilot just what a geek I really was. So, so I just completely geeked out on all the different parts of an airplane and, principles of flight, and we somehow built a rapport. And I have to say, I'm so indebted to that pilot because 2 days later we did actually fly.
Right.
You can imagine the scene, flying in the Swiss mountains in the summer. I mean, it doesn't get any better, and it was just absolutely stunning. Yeah. And the pilot let me fly, let me have a go on the controls, let me fly around. We landed. I met my very anxious parents after landing.
Yeah.
And this pilot lied through his teeth and said that I was a very, very good pilot and a natural, and so basically he also encouraged my parents to continue my habit, as it were, or my future habit. That's when I was 12.
When you were 12, wow. Okay. Well, I've been very fortunate. I've flown in lots of different airplanes, business types and helicopters and things with any number of pilots, and I have flown behind you in a PC-12 as a passenger, and I have to say that experience certainly was very good. So can't comment on 12-year-old Edwin, but certainly Edwin now in his early 30s is definitely a good pilot. So since then, there have been lots of airplanes. You've owned lots. I'm guessing you've flown more than you've owned as well. Can you give us a little feel? You've mentioned Cessnas to me in the past. So I know there's a Cessna in there, obviously PC-12. What kind of types have you flown, and what's the story of why you've owned some?
Yeah, I think I've always enjoyed flying multiple different types of aircraft. That's always been something that's I just found a challenge, just to fly different types and to just to get used to their different handling qualities and that kind of thing. And so fairly early in my flying career, I joined the Tiger Club. So they're, of course, renowned for vintage aircraft. And I think the very first airplane I converted to actually after my PPL was a J3 Cub, and that was actually in Switzerland again. So same part of the world, southern Switzerland. Flying in the summer, flying with the doors open, of course, in the Cub. It just got like pure, authentic flying. It's just such a wonderful experience. And I was just bitten by the vintage aircraft bug. Flying a tail wheel, the handling challenges that come with a tail wheel. I just wanted to master that and perfect it. I had mastered it in Switzerland, but just perfect it. And that's what led me to the Tiger Club. And of course, they have a number of different vintage airplanes. Obviously, the Tiger Moth.
Sure.
They have aerobatics. They have formation flying. So I was starting to do competition aerobatics in the Stomp, which looks very similar to Tiger Moth, but it has more ailerons. So it's more maneuverable and more responsive, and an inverted fuel system, importantly. And then I eventually flew all the Tiger Club aircraft and became a member of the Biplane 4, the display team.
Right.
Both Stomps and Tiger Moths, doing formation displays, doing some gentle aerobatics and tail chases, that kind of thing as well. Did display and competition aerobatics. I then somehow ended up owning not owning, but flying an Oster. So a friend of mine had an Oster, an old British airplane, and it wasn't actually an army airplane, this particular one, but again, a delight to fly. And that's how I discovered farm strip flying. So then I started flying to all the little farm strips in Kent. Just dropping in for a cup of tea in this Oster, and again perfecting the technique of flying a tail wheel and short field takeoffs and landings, that kind of thing. And then so I think I was just very fortunate that I enjoyed touring. So you mentioned the Cessna. I had a Cessna 210, still do. So that's actually that was my first aircraft that I actually owned, and I still own it.
Wow.
And I used that to tour, IFR, flying at altitude with oxygen. It's a fantastic airplane for that. So I flew many different types of general aviation aircraft. Then I flew professionally, so I flew an XLS as well, Citation XLS for a while. And then got into the Pilatus world and flew multiple other types from there as well. Which you probably come on to,
but what you haven't mentioned there, of course, and what especially fascinates me, is that you've also flown fast jet. So you've flown the Follow Nat, which was a 2-seat trainer for the RAF prior to the Hawk, flown by the Red Arrows famously, and the Finns and the Indians and one or two other people. So tell us first about the Nat, and then I have a particular question relevant for you about the Nat. And I can see by the look on your face, you already know what that's going to be. But anyway, tell us about flying the Nat, which I know is a very fast, very nimble aeroplane.
It's an absolute dream of an aeroplane to fly. I mean, one of the most famous pilots in the UK, Ray Hanna, who of course famously flew both the Spitfires, MH434, and then also led the Red Arrows in the Nat as well. I think he was asked by the media a long time ago, if you had a choice between a Nat and a Spitfire, which would you go for? And he immediately said both, please, without any hesitation. I have not had the privilege of flying a Spitfire, but the Nat is, pilots say that you put it on and you wear it, and I think that's a very good description. It's a tiny aircraft. I was very lucky that I am able to safely exit the aircraft if I need to in an emergency. So they made sure that there was a harness and a hoist over the airplane as they're installing the seat, and I was wearing all my gear. And when they lifted me clear, following the path of an ejection potentially, that I would actually clear everything in the cockpit. So it's so I'm very fortunate that I do safely fit in and out of the Nat, so to speak. And it's just a delight to fly. Very, very fast roll rate. I mean, there's a famous story about Fuse 13, which we might come on to later. But it's the aircraft does have a very, very fast roll rate. It's just a joy to fly. You really do wear it. You just think about flying a 60-degree turn, and you're there. And it's a delight to fly.
Yeah. So that getting in and out of the cockpit was the part that really interested me. So when the RAF were training pilots in the Nat, they had to keep some hunters because taller pilots couldn't fit into the Nat and eject safely. In fact, they would leave their knees behind under the instrument panel, I understand. Now, obviously, people who don't know you and who are watching this can't tell, but you are not the shortest person in the world, are you? You're quite tall. And I just imagine folding you into a Nat as being quite an intricate procedure.
Yeah, well, I'm 6'5" when I wake up in the morning, and I'm 6'4" in the evening, and I'm probably 6'3" when I've been putting some G's in a nat. So, so the
So
one
you
way to get around that is pull some more G's.
put some more
But
G's.
no, but yeah, I think it's the thigh length, so it's the upper leg
Yeah,
length.
sure.
That's the key, and I'm very fortunate, as I said. I think the instrument panel in the NAT is a relatively high.
Right.
Sat in a Hawk, and I could see immediately that it wouldn't work. But it's just because
Really?
the instrument panel of the Hawk, even though the Hawk cockpit is quite a bit larger than that,
Yeah.
but the panel is just lower and it sits right up against my knee, so I can tell straight away that in the event of an ejection, it would, as you say, it would just take my kneecaps off.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But then that just works, and of course you're also wearing leg restraints as well, so they pull your legs down and in as you leave the aircraft.
Mm.
And the
Yeah.
seats are great, so it's not you don't go straight up. It's actually sort of at an angle. I'm not sure what it is. Probably not
Yeah.
quite,
It is.
about
Yeah.
60
Yeah.
degrees, something like that. So you're traveling away from the cockpit and everything as you're leaving the aircraft.
Right.
I'm very fortunate that it works. Unfortunately, we have well, not unfortunately, very fortunately, we have a single seat aircraft as well. So
Mm.
we have three two-seat trainers, the T1 NAT,
Yeah.
and we also have an F1 fighter.
Sure.
But unfortunately, I do not. I think I'd be able to safely
Really?
jet from that aircraft. It's just a much smaller cockpit, so I
Yeah.
think I'd be
Sure.
flying in formation with it and not flying in it, sadly.
Huh. Wow. Okay. So, if you were a military pilot, and usually people who fly fast jets have been military pilots, if you're a military pilot, you would have progressed from something like, I don't know, a Grob, and then you'd have gone on to something in modern terms like a T6, a Texan 2, something like that, gradually faster and faster. Then you'd go into a Hawk or an app. And when I speak to pilots who have done that, they say to me, "Oh, I thought I was great in the Grob, and then I went into the Texan, everything went a bit faster, and I thought, yeah, I've got this." And then I went into the Hawk, and it's like, whoa, everything's so quick, I can't keep up. You've gone from a Cub and Tiger Moths and an Oster and even a PC-12 to a Nat. That's an awful lot faster rate of things happening. And as a Typhoon pilot once told me once, if you take your eye off a fast jet, the rate of wrongness increases exponentially. How do you cope with that, keeping that rate of wrongness at bay in something so quick and nimble?
Well, I think first of all, that wasn't quite the progression. So
Okay.
I'd flown jets before. I'd flown the XLS
Sure.
before. And what we all do, so all the trustees and pilots of our group, our charity,
Yeah.
all started off in the Jet Provost. So
Right.
I joined the charity a little bit later, but the trustees who were already there, they actually started displaying in the Jet Provost. They did a lot more time in the JP than I did.
Right.
But they said, I was the new guy joining. They said, you really ought to do exactly the same. So to your point, the same as the military guys did. Of
Mm,
course, we had military instructors as well.
sure.
So really, that's how I cut my teeth. So I started off in the Jet Provost. To be fair as well, I did have a lot more experience than an average, young
Mm, of
RAF student at the time.
course.
So they would go, as you said, straight from a Grob, from a Chipmunk in the day. Also go
Yeah,
from
sure.
Chipmunk to the Jet Provost and then
Mm,
to the NAT. So I found the Jet Provost quite easy to fly actually, because it was a JP3, so it wasn't particularly overpowered.
mm,
For me, it was about getting used to the military SOPs, standard operating procedures, the,
right.
the instrumentation, the
Yep.
look and feel of the displays, which I was
Sure.
used to from the Tiger Moth. I mean, instruments kind of look similar; they're just a few
Yeah.
more common, but it's the same sort of era,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so the JP was a very easy airplane to fly, and the transition to that was certainly a big leap. Absolutely, I mean, it's a swept wing aircraft, and the XLS is not swept wing, so swept wing aircraft do have different characteristics, and you really got to fly the numbers. It's not
Yeah.
it's not an aircraft that you can fly by the seat of your pants,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
because they will sink. You get buffet and sink if you get the aircraft too slow. So
right.
you can fly accurately, knowing what the weight of the aircraft is. So depending on the fuel loads, you fly different approach speeds accordingly.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and you
Yeah.
need to practice. I mean, the key thing with any complex aeroplane, and the NAT is no exception, is if I'm flying in a PC-12 or even my Cessna 210, if I haven't flown it for a while, or a NAT, I will read through the POH very carefully, especially the emergency procedures,
Mm,
remind myself of the systems, and that way you're fresh and you're current and you've got it all in your mind, especially the emergency procedures on any aircraft, because you don't practice them that often. You should
no.
practice them at least, if you're flying an AOC, every 6 months, or at least every year. That's
Right.
the minimum. But then to read through it again, you can go through it in your mind, and then you're ready for it, and then you're ready for any eventuality.
Mm. Flying is a very perishable skill, isn't it? It's very easy, I think, for especially for experienced pilots sometimes to think, I've done it so many times before, it'll be fine. And that attitude works until that day when it isn't, I guess.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
right.
think it is a perishable skill, and every discipline within flying is also perishable. I mean, that's the other thing.
Right.
I
Yeah.
I still fly piston aerobatics, and I love piston
Okay.
aerobatics. I still fly at the Tiger Club. I love flying the Cap
Right.
10. So I moved from the Stomp to the Cap 10, and it's very different from doing jet aerobatics and the NAT. And I
Mm.
don't feel that if I've flown the Cap 10 or I've flown the NAT that I'm current in the other aircraft. Obviously, I mean they're completely
Mm.
different.
Sure.
Formation flying is very different. Flying IFR is very different.
Yeah.
Um, flying a tiger moth into a short runway or a cub, they're
Mm.
all different skills, and they all need
Yeah.
to be kept up to speed.
Yeah, sure, sure. There's one other thing I'd like to investigate with the net before we move on, and that is you mentioned the rate of roll, which is very fast. I know a it will remain between us story from the Red Arrows from many years ago about that rate of roll. Maybe you're about to share that with us. I'm not sure, but just tell us how I don't know how quick does that feel when you are maneuvering that little tiny jet aeroplane?
It is very quick. I mean, so what you're referring to is Fuse 13s. There is actually an airspeed switch
Right.
that limits the aileron deflection above. I think it's quite a low speed. I think it's about 200 knots or even less.
Yeah.
And that reduces the rate of roll. And that's because the earlier NATs did not have a strengthened fin. That was the
Mm.
reason, and that's why they wanted to limit the roll rate. And then they strengthened the fin. And then, sure enough, I think that the Reds put blown Fuse 13 back in the airplane. So the airplane had Fuse 13 in it, but it was blown.
Yeah.
And the rate of roll was spectacularly fast. But it really does. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the roll rate is, but if you go full aileron deflection in an airplane without Fuse 13, it does complete the roll in a blink of an eyelid,
Yeah.
literally. But I think
Yeah.
it's more than 360 degrees a second.
Yeah. I think
So
that's right. I think
yeah,
yeah. They
doing
nick
twinkle rolls.
yeah, twinkle rolls indeed. That was what they were nicknamed. I understand there were the nine of the Hawks, all with that fuse disconnected or blown, did twinkle rolls simultaneously, all rotating through 360 degrees in less than a second. Must have been spectacular, but very, very wrong at the time. So
Yeah,
okay. It's
yeah.
I want to return to some more sort of aviation passion, if you like, in a bit. But first of all, you mentioned Technam. You're now Oriens is a Technam dealership, and I guess Service Central, that kind of thing. Technam, I know, dabbled in electric aviation. We won't go there because it didn't quite work out yet. But electric aviation in general is something people are talking about lots. For me, right now, it's really, really good for a two-seat training airplane doing circuits around an airfield. It's got some potential into sort of 8, 9 seat regional air mobility, but I just wonder what your thoughts are on electric aviation over the next sort of 4 or 5 years or so.
Yeah. Well, I have to stress I'm not an expert, so I'm not an engineer.
Oh, no.
My observation of it, I think, is that the key issue is the battery technology.
Yeah.
So I believe the industry is already around 2 to 3 billion, as you said. So smaller electric aircraft that can fly in the circuit, that are very good trainers, that they're already here and they're already with us. And they're already doing a great job training
Yeah.
pilots. But the issue is range, and it's just getting the battery weight and
Mm,
capacity to the right levels for aviation to support
sure.
a greater range.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going to be some way off. So Technam are really researching this very, very carefully. They haven't stopped. They
Right.
have a hybrid aircraft also that they're using. So they
Okay.
took a P2010 and they made
Yeah.
it a hybrid airplane. So they're still really experimenting with electric aircraft and with electric powertrains and all that kind of thing. But I believe we're probably looking at sort of 2034, 2035 for that hockey stick to really happen, for that mushroom to occur.
Yeah.
Um, with as you say, the range is the key, and I just don't think
Mm,
we're going to get there anytime soon. So I think again with the sort of, you mentioned the 8 or 9 seat aircraft, probably by the end of the decade,
mm,
maybe we'll
yeah.
start seeing those flying very short ranges to start with. But
Yeah.
it's a start.
That's my
Yeah,
thought exactly. I think something that people often maybe just don't even think about is, of course, you in a regular airplane you get lighter the further you fly, in an electric powered airplane with batteries, you weigh the same when you get there as you did when you took off. And that has a real difference on the way you fly and how far you can fly, of course.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I must admit, I've yet to fly an electric aircraft. I hate to. I really would love to. I must go up to Damon's Hall and fly with Deepak. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Or go see our friend Alex Durand at Saxon. We spoke to him a couple of episodes ago, and of course they have one of those little V-less electro things, whatever they're
yes,
called,
yeah, yeah.
in the hangar there, which is
Oh wow.
it's a funny looking little thing. I would love to see you sitting in one of those. There's not a lot of space, so maybe that's not such a good plan. We'll see. Anyway, okay, right. So we talked a lot about the airplanes you've owned, the airplanes you have flown. There must be types of airplane left that you would still really like to fly, and I wonder if you could just pick one or two of those and tell us why.
Yeah, I think honestly, I've been very, very fortunate that I've flown so many different types of aircraft. I think the one group of aeroplane that I haven't really flown a lot of are the big pistons, the big
Right.
piston warbirds, and I think that would be a dream come true for me. It really would. I mean, I've flown a Harvard, I've flown a T6 Harvard, and that's obviously a good trainer for the Spitfire and the P-51 Mustang.
Right.
But yeah, to fly, I mean, obviously, the Spitfire is so iconic. So to
Mm.
fly a Spitfire, to fly
Yeah.
P-51 Mustang would be a wonderful experience, or a Hurricane. I mean, I was fascinated by the Battle of Britain, our country's heritage and history when I was a child, and I still am very fascinated by it. And it was really the Hurricane, of course, that won the Battle of Britain. It wasn't the
Absolutely.
Spitfire. Everyone thinks of the Spitfire, but it
Yeah.
really was the Hurricane that by far outnumbered the Spitfire. It has the
Yeah.
same engine, the same Merlin engine.
Yeah.
That'd
Yeah.
be an
Yeah.
aeroplane I would absolutely love to fly. I don't really have a hankering to fly the airliners, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
I think the experience of flying a business jet and the discipline of flying on an AOC and flying that kind of operation IFR ticks that box for me. I
Yeah.
like the challenge and the skill of actually flying an airplane and
Mm.
flying a business jet. You have all of that. You have all the professionalism, all the discipline.
Yeah. Yeah.
Flying a large airliner is kind of similar to that, but it's just a very different environment where you tend to be flying the same sort of routes. You don't get the same
Mm.
variety that you get with a business jet. So yes, I
Yeah.
think to answer your question, it's really the big piston warbirds. I think
Okay.
that would be the ultimate for me.
What about a modern fast jet? I mean, the Nat is very high performing, but it's not a Typhoon or an F-22. What about a modern fast jet? What are your thoughts about that? A backseat ride in a Typhoon, let's say.
Oh, I mean, a backseat ride in a Typhoon would be amazing, of course. It goes without saying, but I think I'm quite, when it comes to flying, I'm quite a purist, and I love actually flying. And for me, it's the satisfaction of really flying the aeroplane. And again, I'm not an expert, and I might be completely wrong, but my sense is that a modern fighter is much more fly by wire.
Mm.
The pure flying has been somewhat diminished, and a modern fighter is much more a system and a weapon of war.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, the challenges of flying a modern fighter are very different. So it's
Mm.
less on the flying and much more on the management of the systems, the management of the weapons,
Yeah.
and the flying, because of the electronics on the airplane, have been simplified to a
Mm.
large extent. And
Yeah.
I think I'm just a pure aviator and a pure flying purist, really, and that's why
Sure.
I love the challenge of actually flying.
Yeah. I know a very experienced XRF pilot who flew the Typhoon and the Spitfire with Battle Britain Memorial flight. And he said the Spitfire took 80% of his ability to fly, leaving him 20% left to operate. The Typhoon was the other way around, 20% to fly, 80% to operate. Which illustrates exactly what you were saying.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So I'm no expert. I don't know much about modern fighters, but I would imagine that's the case. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Of course, you have warbirds there at Biggin Hill alongside you, don't you? Because there's a Spitfire, Hurricane, whatever operation that goes on there. It's just a walk across the apron. I'm sure you could just pop in one day.
Well, I know Peter very well, actually, Peter Monk. So yeah, no, he did actually promise me a flight in the Spitfire, so I need to
Ah,
keep talking him.
there we go. There we go. Well, tell him I said so. There we go. We need to speak to you again afterwards, find out what it was like. Now we're kind of running out of time here, so this is the big question. You've owned lots of airplanes, you've flown lots of airplanes, you're clearly in love with all of them, but I need to know if you've got a favorite.
That's such a difficult question to answer. I hope you're not going to put me on the spot here. I think In terms of utility and versatility, it's got to be the PC-12. It really does. I mean, you can do so much with that aeroplane. It'll do anything a larger aircraft will do, anything a jet will do. It just takes a little bit longer if you want to go very, very long distance.
Sure.
But certainly if you're flying short haul, it'll do anything a jet can do, plus a whole lot more. It can get into all those short strips. In terms of the pure flying, I would have to say, something like the Gnat. I mean, it's just such a wonderful airplane to fly. The handling of it, the aerobatics, the power and the speed of it is just unmatched. And our instructors, I mean, of course, our instructors are all military instructors, and they have a lot of experience in the Hawk, and they do say they prefer the Gnat, and they prefer the handling of the Gnat, and even the power to weight ratio of the Gnat. So it just doesn't get much better.
Yeah. Okay. Do you still get to fly the Gnat very often?
I do. In fact, I flew it with the Red Arrows last week. In fact, so we had the Red Arrows launched their 60th anniversary.
Yeah.
And of course, they wanted the Gnat there as the original Red Arrow. So I had the privilege to fly the yellow Jacks Gnat to Waddington, and then we flew in formation with the Red Arrows, which was truly an experience of a lifetime. So hopefully I'll be doing some displays this season as well. So I'm need to get my DA back again and then do some displays. So yeah.
so I'm picturing here that the arrows were in their kind of 9V formation, and you're in the slot behind them. Is that how that works?
Exactly. So I was in the stem, as they call it, and I had so we're very privileged that one of our instructors is actually Red 4. So without his help, I mean, he was just amazing in organising everything, coordinating everything with the Reds.
Right.
So he was in the back of the airplane. Of course, there's a limited amount of time that the Red Arrows have. They have such a very intense display season, practice season. So I attended the briefing, which I'd be lying if I said I understood much of it. To be honest, there's so much jargon in a Red Arrows brief these days. So Ollie was sitting in the back. He of course knew the brief, knew the form. So he was flying the airplane for much of the very close formation work.
Right.
And I did the rest of the flying, and I did get to fly in formation with a Hawk as well, which was amazing. When I was alone with Red 10, I was able to fly in formation. So I can say I've flown in formation with the Red Arrows jet myself. So
it's pretty special.
It was a privilege. It was a real privilege, I have to say.
Yeah, we like that very much. I did see once David Coulthard and Lewis Hamilton went flying with the Reds, and they sat in on the briefing. And after a bit, Coulthard put up his hand and said, "I'm sorry, you lost me at good morning."
Well, actually, we had some of the original Red Arrows, and they attended the brief as well. And they said, honestly, we didn't understand it either. I think so I think things have changed a bit over the years.
Yes. Okay. So all right, I can't argue with that. Favorite airplane, the Gnat, flew it in formation with the radar. Just drops that into the conversation. Did that last week, just like you do. I just think fabulous. We can't really top that. We're running out of time anyway, so we're going to leave it there. So thank you so much, Edwin, for joining us. This has been our 4th episode. I hope everyone who's watching this has enjoyed it as well. I'd love to hear if you did. If you didn't like it, well, tell us that too. Tell us about any guests you'd like to hear, and we'd just love to know what you say. Edwin, thanks again so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Paul. Real pleasure. Pleasure was all mine.
Thanks a lot. Great.